Hi, now we're looking at chapter 8 called Assumptions, Presuppositions, and the Inferring of Meaning from Exploring the Language of Poems, Plays, and Prose by Mick Short, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to work a lot faster here because there are fewer things I want to explain. These terms, particularly assumption and inference, are terms that belong to actually ordinary language, right? So sometimes we get confused. Don't be, because actually we use them in the way they're being used normally. So an assumption, I'm going to take this sense when you assume well, a bit self-referential, right? That something is true, right? When you decide, you think something is true, right? A fact or statement, sense 3b, that is taken for granted, right? So I think something is true. You make an assumption. And these assumptions are driven by our schemata. Remember the word schema we have seen elsewhere. We're going to see it again in a minute. Presupposition is a term we don't use in the way we use normally, right? Which is to suppose beforehand. We use it in a different way. And infer actually is a term that we use in the same way. People use it, but there is a bit of a problem, right? For native speakers of Spanish, the word infer is not problematic, but it is for everyone else. We infer something from an event, right? So we derive as a conclusion, and here Oxford says you reach an opinion or decide that something is true on the basis of information that is available. So it's a synonym for the verb deduce. We have seen this already. So you infer that I am tired because I sighed, for example, right? But the problem with the word infer is that native speakers of English are very much confused, and they have begun to use it incorrectly by saying, are you inferring I am incompetent? And actually, we don't think the word infer means suggest or hint or imply. And that's why, sorry, there's an explanatory box, right, a usage guide here that explains where the problem stems from. Merriam-Webster is a much more descriptive dictionary, so it will say, well, this is what people do. Initially, for some people, this is wrong. And, well, Oxford is going to be much blunter in this respect. Which word, I invite you to read the entry, of course, but it is going to tell us, however, it is still considered incorrect in standard English. When you say, are you inferring that I'm a liar? The word you wanted here was, are you implying that I am a liar, right? So this is considered incorrect. Well, going back to your notes, if we, I'm going to take you to, I mean, the chapter is very interesting, but I'm going to make a very quick summary. On page 225, the writer explains what presupposition is, and I'm going to take you to the bottom where he writes distinctions along the line of assumptions, which I have referred to above, with general schematic knowledge about how the world works at one end and presuppositions embedded in individual sentences at the other. What does this mean? That presupposition is linguistic. Presupposition is explicit. So he says, if I say 3 of John's children are in hospital, it is clear that the fact that John has at least 4 children, right? This is embedded in 3 of his children are in hospital. The same happens when I say another book discusses the same topic. There was one before. And if I say later we will see something new. There was something previous to that. And that is lexicalized in the words another or later. So presupposition is what we call explicit, what we understand from the words, from their denotational meaning, right? The referential meaning, right? They already say something. So it is linguistic. Now, when I make an assumption, actually, I am using schemas. On page 227, the writer explains schemas, right? We have seen schemas as well. Schemas is an anglicized plural, but you have also the Latin plural, sorry, the Greek plural, which is schemata, right? And he tells us a story. This is very interesting, though. The book was published in 1996. He tells us that when he went to teach in China, when he was lecturing there, students provided him with a cup of green tea while he lectured, and they topped it up and whenever it went empty, right? And now he says that he has this special sub-schema for lectures in China. That's the way lectures occur there. But for this, I want to maybe refer to other schemas. In the video, I explained schemas, I told you, or schemata. I told you there are two types of schema. This is explained on page 228. We can refer to a frame or a script. A frame includes elements that are part of a situation, whereas a script includes them in sequential order, right? So one after the other one. And if you think about right now, it's Passover or Easter, and both celebrations can be viewed from the point of view of a frame. That is to say, there will be, I don't know, attending the synagogue or church, and there will be singing, there will be food, there will be gatherings, right? All these elements are the frame of these celebrations. But actually, you can also think of them as a script, because you may think that first you're going to maybe fast or not, then you're going to go to the synagogue, then you're going to do some singing, then you're going to gather with people and celebrate, and maybe you will toast and whatnot, okay? So that's how we think about schemas, and he says later on the same page that they are shared, packaged experiences, right? So it's like a set of ideas that come together for us, right? On page 231, he says schemas are organized representations of background knowledge. So it's all the knowledge we have, which is organized in our head. Imagine if it weren't organized. It would be crazy, right? We wouldn't be able to make sense of the world. Notice also he tells us on page 233 that schemas may not be related to direct experiences of our own, right? We know schemas simply because they exist, but I want to spell out schemata so that you see. Well, you had it in the plural for schema, right? But I mean, that's how we understand the world. The problem is when there is a mismatch, right? And remember that schemas are activated. Imagine you travel to another country and you think a certain area of a town is dangerous because through the process of analogy, you think that, I don't know, a lonely area, because you live in Buenos Aires, is dangerous. And you... And because of that, right, you're confused because actually the place is not dangerous. What has happened? You have activated the schema that matches the situation, but it contradicts the place where you are. It's not the same, right? So what happens in those cases is that we accommodate, right? We adapt our schemas and create a new one, right? Well, actually, when I go to this place, a lonely area does not necessarily mean danger, okay? And that's why he says that sometimes our schemas clash, right? Finally, as regards inference, which is on page 238, he explains further that presuppositions are embedded in the structure of sentences, whereas inference is based on a small action And he says that this looks like the behavioral equivalent of presuppositions embedded in sentences. Well, it's what we do, right? It's how we, if we go back to an earlier concept, is how we build coherence, right? How we make something make sense. But what happens if I say to you, you're not the only one who was mistaken? Is the fact that there was somebody else who was mistaken something presupposed or inferred from the text? That is to say, when I say, yes, you're not the only one who was mistaken, do I imply there was somebody else, or am I saying it? Is it actually explicit? Sometimes, well, it's difficult to tell. Honestly, it doesn't matter because we understand the same thing, don't we? Now, what happens when I say, for example, all the women who did this are smart. I didn't do this. I am not smart. Clearly, that is inference, right? Still, I would like to say that these terms are very much contested. Different linguists have different opinions or use them differently. For us, I wanted to think about as the process of inference as something that is cognitive, a mental exercise in which we make deductions, we draw conclusions, right? Whereas presupposition is going to be what is linguistic, something that is explicit in the text, okay? So if I say that something is presupposed in the text, it's because the words say it. And if I say we can infer it from the text, it's because I am drawing on assumptions. And I believe that's about it, right? Yes, the rest is about conversational rules, and I am not interested in that. You're gonna see that in other classes possibly, right? Okay, that is all.